I'm really thinking differently about this episode based on our conversation.
Catalytic moments like this force us to grow up more quickly than we would want, or that more quickly than a safety net would allow us.
You talk about the difference between deciding your fate and having your fate imposed upon you, or the inevitability of your fate.
Evan, I spent a few years as a hospice chaplain in a hospital, and I can tell you just from experiencing room after room and situation after situation, those that, even though their fate was felt to be out of their hands, those that were able to reckon with, like, I'm going out the way that I want to go out, they had so much peace, and their families had so much more peace. Not that there wasn't grief and sadness, but they regained control.
This show is worth taking the time to go back and analyze. There are a lot of lessons to be learned, and there's a lot of great storytelling elements that are in here that get nested into a action-packed, high-octane, fungal zombie adventure.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Prof. Noctis's recap of The Last of Us Season 1 as we count down to Season 2. Today, as always, I'm here with Evan. How you doing, Evan?
Oh, we are great. We're getting very close to Season 2.
We are. It's exciting. Not just because we're making our way through Season 1, but because the actual launch date of Season 2 is coming in. Like, we're getting almost daily information at this point, which I'm really excited about, new pictures and all that stuff. So, but we do have a few episodes to get through as we are kind of recapping and reminding ourselves of some of the themes and the tropes and all that kind of stuff that are present in The Last of Us, both Season 1 and also Part 1 of the video game. So today we're talking about Left Behind, which is the adaptation of the DLC, that's downloadable content for the video game. It's a flashback-heavy episode, and we've got a lot to say about it.
Yeah, well, you said we were kind of getting through, the last of these episodes. And for some folks, this episode was one that they really felt like they had to get through. This is not a fan favorite for a lot of people. Not everybody played the DLC in the game anyways. Right. So I think there's a lot of questions as to why they chose to tell the story this way. And I think it does make some sense. We get a lot of Ellie's character development, and we get some backstory there. But we also have to acknowledge that for some folks, the action was really heating up, and we left our scene with Joel with this like baseball bat shoved in his side, and Ellie trying to save his life. And then we open up in this cabin, and there they are again. And then we get this kind of flashback episode. So how did you feel when you watched this originally? Do you remember?
I hate any flashback episode of any TV show ever. Just because, like, I mean, they used to do this in everything from, Full House to now The Last of Us. It's like, it's always the episode that takes you out of the present moment. And it's like, just get on with the story.
Walk with me on this thought experiment. What about an episode of Full House that is what happened to the Full House, the Tanners, in the apocalypse? Like rather than just Sarah and Joel's day one, what about all of the Full House characters in?
I would watch that. I mean, I would watch the what happened to the Tanners in the apocalypse, as long as it was present time. I don't even know what happened before.
Can you imagine Kimmy Gibbler coming in, and instead of her interrupting, she's just been infected? So
she was the infected.
She was always the infected the whole time.
Yeah, you could hear her coming from a mile away.
That would be perfect. So when it comes to this episode, we're going to talk about it a little bit differently than we've talked about some other episodes, because essentially what happens in this episode is we open up and Joel is in peril, and Ellie's kind of figuring out what to do. We have these quiet moments, and then she kind of opens this door to go out and get supplies. But they really are showing that she's opening the door to her past, and that's what we're going to explore. So once she opens that door, we fade in, and Ellie is jogging in a sweatsuit in what looks like a high school gym. So before we recap every part of this episode, we're going to be using something that you want to use to evaluate some of the ways that these characters process change. And so I'm going to let you introduce that model. And so let's understand what that is a little bit, so that as our characters are experiencing it, we're going to see some of those steps along the way. So put on your learning hats, everyone. Wade is going to teach us a little bit about a change model from someone named Elizabeth Kubler Ross. Did I pronounce that correctly, Wade?
I think so. Honestly, I've only ever read it and stuff. So
Okay.
And maybe slept through lectures on it. But
well, tell us about why it's important first, and then tell us the details.
This is the model for change, but specifically, it's equated with a model of grief and the stages of grief that you go through. Now, there's a lot of research that goes into this, and the stages of grief aren't necessarily linear, and they're not necessarily always present in somebody's grief. So there's a lot of things that can go into that. But I do think that there are some interesting parallels that happen between Left Behind and also Joel's story, as well as these characters kind of manifest a new life, moving beyond trauma and grief. And so that's why it's important. It's just a good framework for helping somebody understand and pinpoint what they're feeling, why they're feeling, and how to progress out of it.
I'm bought in as long as we turn all of this analysis towards the characters and none of it inwards. Then
we don't want to do anything inward. And so
no self-reflection.
Yeah, we're going to keep it safe and only about clickers and Ellie and Joel. So there.
All right, that. Thanks. So you said there's 5 primary stages and then 2 bonus stages, DLC, if you will.
We'll call them DLC. Yeah. So the 5 primary, and I am, just so you know, I am following the template and the model that is from The Psychology of the Last of Us. If you saw the Anthony Bean interview that we did a few weeks ago, this is straight from one of the chapters in this book. The chapter is called Look for the Light, Surviving Grief in a World Gone Dark. So the way that they frame this is you begin with shock and you move into denial, you move into frustration, into depression, experiment or experimentation, and then finally those 2 DLC bonus stages are decision and integration. And so this is moving from a catalyst all the way back to reintegration into normal life, or a new normal life.
Okay, so let's just recap that again. So the first thing is shock. So something happens and you experience shock that it has happened.
It's the catalyst. It's the thing that you're forever changed your psyche, forever changed your normal, oftentimes irreparably.
Okay, so then we go into denial. I can't believe that this is happening, an inability to process and assimilate what it is that has shocked us in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's that idea of like, is this for real? Am I dreaming? This has got to be just a nightmare. Let me wake up. That sort of thing.
Okay, so frustration would be something like you hop on to record a recap show about The Last of Us, and then your friend makes you confront the grief process in the middle of it. Yeah,
that can be frustration. It might manifest in me taking a baseball bat to some of my trinkets behind me.
That's perfect. You've had that kind of week. All right, good.
Sometimes.
I love it. Then it goes to depression. I'm sad that I told my friend and made that joke that way so that he would feel that as we were recapping The Last of Us.
I'm sad. I'm now sad because all of my trinkets are broken, but also so is my life. So
yeah, okay, there you go. So I think that does go to illustrate there are those tertiary things that can happen along the way. That the shock is one acute thing, but the depression, the frustration can be wider scaling, and we can start to transfer some of that frustration and depression onto other things not necessarily related to the shock, but it's been maybe begun or catalyzed by the shock, as you would say, since you said that the beginning event is called the catalyst.
Yeah. And this moves into, you can stay in depression as long as necessary and really indefinitely until you begin to experiment. And so it's this moment of vulnerability and an act of courage to say, okay, I'm going to give something else a shot. And I'm going to experiment, kind of like tiptoeing, like dipping your toe into the water to see if it's going to burn you or something like that. But it's like, okay, I'm going to try this. an experiment. And so that is when someone begins to regain and reclaim part of their life again.
Okay, I love the way you said that. An act of courage to give something else a shot. Why do you describe it as an act of courage? And maybe let's relate it away from... We think of grief as like loss, like you lose a loved one or you lose something that you care about. But grief is like ever present in our lives in all sorts of different ways. So I want to focus a little bit on this act of courage to give something new a shot. Why do you call it an act of courage? Why is that an important way to say that, and what does that look like in our lives?
Well, you've been hurt before, either because of, especially in loss and grief over another person. It's like, I loved this person, I lost this person. Do I want to love risking loss again? Yeah. So it's easier. I guess I would say it's easier. It's safer, at least, to not do that again because it is at least possible that you can get hurt. And so there is an act of courage that says, I could lose again, but it's worthwhile. There's something on the other side of this. And so that's why I say it's an act of courage, because you're opening yourself to disappointment, pain, and another catalyst.
Yeah, I think I've heard it described as the most familiar way to make sure you don't experience the same pain.
Yeah, that's fair.
As long as I don't do this again, I can avoid this again, the kind of painful part of it. Tell us about this DLC here. So we have decision making, I guess, and integration. Tell me why they're DLC and why they're not included in the original bundle. And is this just the Grief Game of the Year edition? How do I manage this?
Man, I don't... The way that I would kind of say it with decision making, and there are people so better qualified than me to talk about this. So I'm just like an armchair I'm not even an armchair psychologist. I'm just an armchair hack that talks psychology.
You're a secret lab chair psychologist.
Right? A secret lab chair psychologist. But the decision moment is when you find an experiment that you can bank on a little bit more, and you're going to say, this is the experimentation that I want to become a little bit more permanent. So I'm choosing something that I believe, after testing, could be a way forward. So you make some decisions saying yes to some things and no to a bunch of others.
Yeah.
To kind of chart a new course.
Okay, so it seems like steps 5, 6, and 7, experimentation, decision-making, and integration, are a lot more active than the first 4 steps. It seems like shock, denial, frustration, and depression just kind of happen to us. Yeah, and then and you can see the arc of the agency getting restored as we start to take a more active role. And so that would also make sense why 6 and 7 are more DLC, because if you don't take the active role of experimentation, we're probably going to be removed from the active role of decision-making and integration. Is that a good framework?
I think it's a great way of saying it, the arc particularly. And you can get stuck in the arc. We all get stuck in life, and we can't ascend to the next thing because we're just, for lack of a better term, stuck. And so the first half of this feels very instinctually reactive, whereas the last half feels a little bit more autonomous and responsive. And so we are moving from a reaction to a response here. And I think that when the world gets out of control, you are wresting control back. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where this experimentation, decision, and then ultimately integration. What does life look like now that I've made some decisions? Is it worth it? Is this what I wanted? That's more of a question for probably season 2, but that's
we don't even know what parts of it we're going to get to. So, but I think that thank you for taking the time to walk us through that, because as we look at and recap this episode, this is a great framework to kind of learn a little bit about what this looks like in our experience as we go through our lives, but we get to see it in this rapid way in this flashback with Ellie and a character that we're soon going to meet, which is her kind of best friend, Riley, that we meet pretty quickly after this opening scene. So if we go back to that transition where Ellie has opened this door to go get supplies to save Joel, and we enter into your favorite, a flashback of kind of opening the door to her past and how she got the way that she is.
Let me say this about the flashback thing really quick, because I don't know if we'll get another chance to say it. I played the DLC and I liked the DLC, but I think there was like a year or more removed from the game.
Yeah.
And so it didn't feel invasive to me in the game. Simply because it was like, oh, more Last of Us. Oh, this is great. Because I'd already played through the game. It wasn't like I was halting the present moment. And I think that's why, for a lot of people, this particular episode was like, gosh, and I've got to wait another week before I figure out what happens with Joel.
It is tough in a week to week where you aren't sure what's going to happen. And for viewers who don't know how it's going to turn out, in the story that doesn't seem hesitant to really kill anyone, that would be pretty agonizing. But it is an interesting narrative tool as well to be able to force the viewer to pay attention to something deeper, get the answer to something more simple, as in, will this piece of wood lodged deeply into his side be the thing that is his undoing, and will Ellie have to go on alone? So, love it or hate it, it's part of the story, and
but this is a good place for that. And in fact, in the DLC, they have this part too. So I mean, it really shows beat for beat where this is meant to reframe your experience of what Ellie is doing and why she's working so hard to save Joel, because it really does capture what she said to Sam a few episodes ago. Her biggest fear is ending up alone. So she's fighting with everything she's got for this. Well, the question is why? Well, let's go back to why.
It's a great point. And you said it earlier that this is probably the most accurate representation of this section of the game in this episode as well. It happens very similarly to how the story progresses. Really one-to-one.
They didn't take a lot of liberties here.
Even a little puzzle getting into the mall.
Yeah. We just needed a crate for somebody to push Ellie across water on.
And something that floats. And then we would be set. Yeah. If you haven't played the game, Ellie is the character that has to do all the little puzzles because she can crawl into all the nooks and crannies. So Joel just kind of yells at her
I
from
never
around
want to see another pallet in my life. I'm so done.
Yeah. Joel just kind of yells at her from around the corner all the time while it's very reminiscent of doing chores with your parents when you were young and you couldn't do anything right. So this flashback opens up and Ellie is jogging in what looks like gym class, and it's very organized. It's very clean. It could be any high school. Everybody's wearing matching sweatsuits, but she's jogging with her Walkman tape player, listening to some music. And we come to find out later, but we'll let you in now, viewer, that this is about 3 weeks before she's met Joel in the story. So where this sits in the timeline, it's about 3 weeks before she has met Joel in the story, and she kind of gets tasked with her charge from Marlene and gets out of the city. So she's jogging, and she gets into a little bit of a argument that quickly spirals out of an argument and into something more physical with a classmate who alludes to the fact that she's maybe kind of smart, but she's not really a fighter. Somebody else has been doing the fighting for her, and Ellie responds in her favorite language, violence, and punches, and the screen just kind of goes black. We don't see the fight, but she kind of wakes up we wake up with her in what looks like the principal's office with this kind of Fedra official who's kind of talking to her. Talk to us about this scene and the conversation that they have and why it kind of sticks out to you.
It really sticks out to me because this is a person in authority, kind of riding Ellie up. And she is in trouble, and this establishes Ellie's resistance to authoritarian figures. I mean, she does not do well, and it's really interesting to see, and we'll talk about this in the next scene, she has a very different response with Riley. And so it's not that she's just shut off to everyone, but you have to really earn Ellie's respect and love. And people that are in authority, it's kind of like I deal with students all the time that they do not necessarily respect people because of their position, but they respect them because they've earned it. And I think that's a lot of us. Though I don't know, do you consider just like if somebody holds an office, they are due that respect? Maybe that's a generational thing. I don't know.
It's a big question. I think that humans in general are worthy of respect. So as just a ground level, there's that kind of inherent. But I think...
Sure, I mean, you're not walking up and punching somebody over a Walkman. So...
Not yet, but maybe younger me, and maybe me in a
Also, do you have a
post-apocalyptic
Walkman?
distant future. I do have my old CD player Walkman.
Nice. Mine's in the garage somewhere.
Mine's in the mine's
keep
just
nothing.
rotting underground, and the plastic will never decompose. The but I think when it comes to positions of power and authority, I think it's almost directly related to how that power and authority is wielded and the attitude. If essentially there's a reciprocal human respect, so I'm going to respect you as a human, and so that gets you a baseline, and that's a value that I have that I want to always maintain. Yeah. So if you return that human to human respect, that's a good foundation for us to then start to evaluate the power dynamics. Sure. But if somebody in authority can't even respect my humanity in its core, then that, to me, over time, as I've grown older, I've learned that's a pretty good warning sign that I need to probably be prepared to have some interesting interactions with that. So I think roles, offices, authority, I think they carry the respect that they earn as much as they understand the legacy. But any of those things, any position of authority, if it's unable to respect the human behind any decision making, and we can't even get into like basic humanist principles, and there's not a respect shown there, then I think that there's a natural degradation of the respect for that authority. And I think you have to be careful, because that isn't, they're demonstrating through the language of power and control that there is not a lot that's going to be respected in the kind of foundational principles. Yeah. So when it comes to how I should respect that authority, it definitely shades and colors that. That's maybe a little more than you were looking for, but what do you think about that?
It's interesting because, I do think, and I agree with you, I think that that's a very 2025 sort of mindset to have. It's been fascinating. Shout out to our RAs, especially Smith. What's up, Smith? He has been doing extensive work for our live streams about Aristotle and the idea of the ideal Greek polis or society, and how this hierarchical nature is really important. And so for the ongoing nature of society, and it seems as though in Aristotle's view, reverence for those offices and hierarchy, even within the family unit, are critical and integral to making society work. Whereas today, we kind of have a little bit more of a postmodern questioning of that. Like, is that really the way? And who benefits from that? Who's at the top and what's in it for them? These are very modern questions. And Ellie represents that so well in this. It's like, well, all I've ever known is this person's will over my life. And then you've got Riley that she entrusts herself to. And just kind of follows implicitly.
Yeah, and they're teenagers making really big decisions too. So
big decisions.
In the developmental process, it's interesting. I think that we see some interesting dynamics within that perspective on authority here, because we kind of get the first humanity. Let me think of a better way to say it. I think we get the first glimpses of humanity in Fedra's approach in that kind of more utilitarian model that we talked about, where he says, well, without us, these people would be starving, or they'd kill each other, or they'd do all these other things. And so it's a very altruistic approach to some of their, let's say it kindly, methods of governance. And so it's that first time that we've heard that really spoken of positively by somebody who's advocating for it. Why does that stand out to you?
It stands out to me because I think that every leader believes they're doing the right thing. Even those whose decisions are really impacting negatively a lot of people, they're still convinced that they're doing the right thing. And so here you hear from Fedra's mouth saying, without us, this is happening. But you also realize, because we've seen other episodes, what damage Fedra is doing. And you see Ellie as well, kind of I don't want to say prisoner, but she is captive in this system. It strikes me that leadership and tyranny works when the person at the top is perfectly moral and altruistic, which just isn't the case.
Yeah. No.
And I mean, that's true of any world of governance, and it's like a system is only as good as those who wield the most power. And if the person at the top is not great, then oopsies, I guess we start again and we go through the process of grief.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, trust and accountability have an interconnected relationship when it comes to power, where in order to trust, we have to know that there's accountability. And in order to assess accountability, there has to be transparency, right? So if any of those stages along the way break down, then you quickly see this degradation of power structures, and why you would get that mismatch in respect for office, title, position versus actual power. What actual power do you have over me, and how are you exerting that power, and what power are you projecting versus what power do you actually have? And when individual liberty becomes suppressed, then humanity tends to lash out over time.
You know, it's so easy to talk about this in terms of politics, and certainly it conveys that. But for most of us, it's like office life. Have you ever had a boss that was like, they like, you know, cut salaries or fire half of your department? It's like, but we're going to have a morale boost pizza party or something like that.
Exactly.
That's what it feels like. It's like, come on, okay.
Well, you would want to. You have people in your lives who do a very good job balancing goals for organizations, family units, friendships, with the reality of the human experience. And when you have somebody in your life who balances that really well, they're probably somebody who believes in you well, who communicates some value and how you contribute to that bigger whole. But then you also, in your mind, know that they're probably going to bat for you a little bit with the power structures that they're involved in. So you're willing to go to bat for them in your context a little bit. And so it's that kind of mutual recognition that results in those really special working relationships that we find ourselves in. The one that move beyond just the office, beyond just the function, to we're actually here together doing something, and we're going to put aside maybe some of our individual needs to contribute to this microcosm of the collective that exists within that dynamic. But unfortunately, we don't always get that understanding. We don't always have the time, and people aren't always, and organizations aren't always set up for success to actually be environments where that exists. And this could be one of those, because he quickly moves from, hey, listen, we're doing all this great stuff, to, she says, just throw me in the hole again. And so we don't know what the hole is, but we assume that it's some kind of solitary confinement or something. And he says, I'd do it, but it's just not going to work.
It's like the break room in Severance. You know?
Yeah, exactly. It's just not going to work. And she goes, okay. But then he launches into this very poignant, almost mentor-mentee conversation about her potential. And he uses a coffee mug and some keys to illustrate these two branching paths as he views it existing within the structure that exists here within the Boston QZ and Fedra. And he essentially says, you can do the things where you're not comfortable and the jobs that you don't want to do, which we find out those are the jobs that Riley has been assigned to later. So keep in mind, this is the contrast that we're going to have here. Or you can be an officer. You can be the ones who help shape decision-making, and you can make things better while being comfortable because of this potential that you have to run things. So there's a bit of an emotional appeal there. Not quite Kathleen territory, I don't think. It's a little more invitational. But the consequences in a branching path for a teenager are real here. How does Ellie respond, and what do you think that moment says about her?
Wow. It really is that question of, am I going to bend the knee to this institution, to this organization, and
do I have a choice
and thrive in it?
Yeah.
Or am I going to resist and be given these menial jobs because I'm still under the umbrella of this organization? And, you know, I've got no choice. I have no agency. So it's like, I can do what I don't want to do and thrive in this terrible situation, at least from her perspective, or, you know, I'll pay the price, like Riley apparently is.
But it's also the first appeal that Ellie might be different than others, that there's this craftiness that we've seen exhibited in her, but this idea of what made her special up to this point in the show is, yes, her personality, but it's her immunity. It's something that she didn't choose. It's part of her genetics. And we start to get this other side where we realize maybe there's more to Ellie than we know. Maybe we've seen her exhibit some craftiness, but maybe it's something that is pretty apparent to people who live with her and work around her regularly, that there's something a little different and special about her. I don't know what the gifted program looks like in this post-apocalyptic world for Fedra, but maybe she goes to a couple special classes or something like that. But she decides, like, okay, listen, I have, in the binary sense, I have these two options. I'm going to choose, the one, I'm going to choose to have some potential. Yeah. And so we see her really come to grips with that a little bit later in the episode, because she kind of understands that this is kind of the path that she's on. But then things change, because we get to meet a fun new character that we don't get to hang on to for very long because she dies. But
spoilers for the end of this episode.
I mean, it's kind of the whole thing with the Elizabeth Kubler Ross model. So we got to make sure that we kind of come in there. So one of the events that is a shock to Ellie that starts this kind of process, we're introduced here when Riley comes back in. Riley kind of surprises Ellie in her room, and they have this kind of touching conversation. We learn a lot about their relationship and a lot about where Riley has been. She disappeared for a little while. Ellie didn't know if she was gone forever or back, but now she's here in front of her. What do they talk about, and why is it important?
Well, it's a reunion, and so there's relief that Riley isn't dead, but also there's an anger from Ellie that's like, where have you been? It's been 3 weeks. You left me. And so there's some abandonment sort of issues. But the long and short of it is we're getting to a place where Riley is saying she's leaving to join the Fireflies. That's one thing that is eventually going to be happening here. And to go back to the model, it's immediately met with denial from Ellie.
Yeah.
Denial. There's really 3 parts of denial in this one episode. How can this isn't happening, right? You cannot go and join the Fireflies.
You can't leave me.
You can't leave me. You can't die. And Joel, you can't die, right? So we've got denial all over the place here. And I think that denial is an important thing, because you need to be convinced that there's nothing to be done.
Yeah.
did
Very interesting.
I explore everything necessary?
Yeah, the way you describe that as kind of that layer cake of denial is, I think, a really creative way to talk about that, because that's what this episode is doing, right? Rather than looking from like the top down to see the pretty pictures decorated on top of the cake, this has kind of sliced that apart and said, here's 3 layers of denial that Ellie's going to be experiencing. And they happened in a different chronology than like a normal timeline. But in this episode, we're going to give you a cross-section and deliver them simultaneously, so we can see how this theme is kind of evident in her life. So they decide to go on a little adventure, and Riley has something that she really wants to show Ellie, and they're obviously trying to make the most of the time that we're going to spend together, but they kind of agree to table this discussion about what's happening a little bit and kind of get on with it. What is important about this next scene, and what has Riley prepared for Ellie in this great mystery?
It's a day at the mall, which is a very normal thing for kids to go and do.
Let's go to the mall.
Yes, good. Don't strike us, YouTube. But but it's the idea of like, we're gonna go and hang out. And when I went to the mall as a kid, back when we had actual malls, now they're all like outdoor strip mall type things. But back in the day, you could go to this huge indoor mall, and it was a place of freedom. Like, your parents would just be like, drop you off, see you later. And like, you could go to all the stores, you were given an allowance and stuff. And that's kind of what's being emulated here. Let's go to a world where we have control, that nobody's watching us, nobody's controlling us, all of that. And it's also just like a celebration of their friendship.
Yeah.
Where Riley has like all of these world wonders, that she's going to show to Ellie. It's really cute and sweet, and it's a fun... I don't know. It's like, who is it? Does Rihanna say we found love in a hopeless place?
That she just does it a few times in that song.
I think a few times in that
just
song.
a few times in that song. Yeah. So as they get into the mall, before we even get to the scene with the escalator, which is great, Ellie is reverent and she's admiring, and we start to see a sense that maybe there's some attraction here with Riley, but we don't really know what the nature of that is. Yeah. And Ellie is obviously impressed with them all. Everything that we know about Ellie has been shown that this has everything that she could ever be interested in, from the relics that she keeps in her room to the Mortal Kombat poster on her wall. I mean, this is the reality that Ellie has desired to experience, and Riley has brought it to her. And so this is obviously something Ellie would be very excited about, but she takes a moment, and it's quick and it's fleeting, but she's most impressed, and it seems like she's most impacted by the fact that Riley took the time to plan something for her. And that's where this starts before they get on this escalator kind of journey together. Why is it important that to Ellie that someone planned something for her? And what does it say about her character that she takes the time to appreciate the thoughtfulness over the material stuff?
Yeah, I think you just said it. I mean, it's just like she's always been told what to do, where to go, and all this stuff, and it's always for the benefit of someone else. But for Riley tonight, this really is for the benefit of Ellie. And so she's planned this thing out. It's so much more special when someone else throws you a birthday party, for example, versus when you say, hey, I'd like to celebrate with everybody, let's go out to eat or something like that. It's always more special when somebody else does it. And I think that is what Ellie is experiencing maybe for the first time in her life. I mean, I don't know. But that's what this connection really is about at this moment. Beyond attraction, beyond admiration, all of that. It's being shocked by the courtesy, respect, generosity, and love that's being shown to her.
Yeah, not a lot of thoughtfulness in the show up to this point. So
everybody's about survival. You can't be thoughtful in a post-apocalyptic world.
You're right.
So it's even more shocking that this is happening.
Right. Yeah, it's very Cormac McCarthy, the stark gray contrast, so that we have these like bright colors pop more in a world of gray, right?
They really do. I'm trying to remember a time when we've had the amount of color we have as in the mall. Like when all the lights come on and stuff. There's not a time in this show that I've seen that level of lighting.
No, the color palette is definitely different. I mean, I think you get a couple moments when they want to bring attention to it. Colors that pop in their surrounding. The dress and the transition to the flashback in episode 3 stands out to me as like a bright color, attractive moment.
Flowers, strawberries,
The Etch-a-Sketch red, I think, is highlighted and pops really well. And then this takes all of those elements and turns them neon and flashing. Yeah, so it is the brightest thing that is in an explosion that we've seen in this show. Not a lot of purples. It's not something that naturally occurs in the environment. So it's our first kind of neon purples and pinks. So that's a really good point, Wade. It's a very different color experience as we kind of watch this. So, like a kid who plays with the box that the toy came in more than the toy, Ellie gets caught up on this escalator, and she's never seen one. She calls it a moving staircase. Riley explains it to her. And then we get a little bit of slapstick comedy from Bella here as they kind of go down the escalator, and she's doing all the things you wanted to do on an escalator as a kid that you were told you weren't allowed to do. Feet up on the handrails, running backwards.
I love that because it's like, oh man, if I had the mall to myself, because this is what I would think about. Like, what if my friends and I had the mall for a night as a kid? Like, what would we do? How would we get into KB Toys and take all their Mario stuff? Like,
well, you could do all that stuff once, and then you'd never be allowed in the mall again.
Oh, absolutely. But go out in a blaze of glory, which is kind of like Ellie and Riley. So.
Yeah, they do. Well, they kind of go throughout the mall. They talk a little bit about how things were and what was important to other people, and Ellie goes, oh, shoes were important to people because the Foot Locker got looted, but the Victoria's Secret didn't. But then you get this moment where you get another kind of check-in on that dotted line of attraction versus admiration. Yeah. Riley makes a comment about, wanting to see Ellie in something that doesn't have a lot of fabric. And we don't know if that's a friendly joke or if that's like a little more of a romantic invitation. We don't know.
But isn't that adolescence too? I mean, there's so much kind of double entendre of middle school, because they're 14, 15, early high school, joking that's like, oh, I'd love to see you in that and stuff. And it could be taken either way, which is also a nice defensive mechanism. It's like testing the waters of flirtation. Oh, man.
Well, I think it goes into those, just to revisit our steps, the 5, 6, 7, the agency steps. You get there a different way, but it's experimentation, decision making, and integration when it comes to change, because those are universal change principles. It doesn't necessarily have to be denial, frustration, and depression in front of it. Those are those change making processes. So we get to experience that a little bit.
Oh boy, I mean, you add into. And I do think it's important to at least note here that it's a nice mirror for dynamics of same-sex relationships, of that denial and the shock and the bargaining, and then finally moving into experimentation and decision and integration. So, I mean, there's a microcosm of that as well in here.
Yeah, we are revisiting some of the concepts that were maybe introduced in episode 3 and kind of that carryover of that it prepared us maybe to receive this later in the episode on a main character.
This episode really is just a tour de force of adolescence, isn't it? Of discovering one's own identity, discovering self, relationships, where you fit in, disappointment, heartbreak, heartache, and growing up. Gosh.
Well, I've never been, to my knowledge, a teenage girl in the past, and I didn't experience my teenage years from that perspective. To my knowledge, you haven't either. So we'd love to hear from you too in the comments. What was your experience like growing up? How well did this mirror or make you think of things from your past? What was it like to grow up in this time and navigate that for you, especially for all the women who are watching? We don't have that same experience, so we'd love to hear from your perspective as it relates to this episode. How did this land with you? Did it remind you of things from your past? Where did it differ, and what did it do well, and maybe what did it miss based on your own experience? Those are great things that we love to hear about, whether it's in the comments or on the Discord. So we also wanted to mention that. So as they kind of go through, we get to these more thoughtful stages. Riley lets her know that there's some things that she's prepared, but it also seems like they're avoiding some of the bigger conversation, but they're starting to have to get into it a little bit. But we get our first shade that things are not right in the mall. We did miss on the way, they see a guy who has spent everything that he had to essentially overdose, and there's a nice bottle of alcohol. I did look it up. The bottle is one that they made up for the show, so it's not an actual bottle. It's like, it starts with an H or something like that. So
you cannot buy it.
Yeah, you can't. That, to the best of our knowledge, you cannot buy it. They take the bottle of alcohol. They talk about how it's different than moonshine, so they've obviously potentially tried it before, or they at least understand the concept. They leave the pills wisely. Good job, girls. And then they move their way into the mall here. So they're kind of drinking a little bit the whole time, and Ellie tries to save face and pretend like it doesn't taste terrible and didn't burn and all those kind of things. She's looking tough. But they get to kind of this arcade, and when they do, we get a scene where we see that there's an infected that kind of is rooted into the wall that wakes up a little bit because of all the noises, alluding to things are not all well. Tell us about this arcade scene and this impending doom that kind of frames some of this magic that they spend together.
Well, it's a great pop culture reference of the time before of playing Mortal Kombat, which I love. I played a lot of Mortal Kombat as a kid. Sometimes, without my parents' knowledge, because it was the kind of game that went to court, to create the ESRB ratings. And all of that.
Yeah, it was pretty formative in our video game lexicon as far as how we evaluate the content of a game. There's actually 2 games that are shown to really prominently. Joust is behind Mortal Kombat. Do you remember the game Joust? Did you ever play it?
No, I did not.
Okay, so Joust is one of my favorite old school arcade games. Yeah, and so...
Is it a PC game? Is that it?
They had it online, but no, it's a cabinet game.
After Rat Cheese.
So you are a like knight with like a lance that rides like an ostrich, and all your opponents are also these knights that ride these ostriches. Okay, and it's a platforming game.
I'm remembering this game
where you jump on their heads. Yeah. So you knock out your opponents by jumping on their heads and kind of flying around. Yeah. And you could flap and do all sorts of other stuff. So it's a very fun game, but I don't know why exactly they included it. I think, one, it could be they really liked that game and they wanted to feature it prominently in addition to Mortal Kombat, and somebody wanted to slip it in. Yeah. But, if I was going to overthink it, I would say that it's a game about positioning and navigating challenging situations, and you have to know where your opponent is and trying to get the upper hand. And so they're trying to navigate their relational feelings with each other on the platforms while they flutter and flop around, and they're trying to do serious things, but they're trying to do it in kind of a teenage, unserious way. So it's the perfect analogy with Joust. So that's me overthinking it. It's the
classic anime, Love is War. Which is the only anime I've ever watched.
You know that you shouldn't watch any other animes ever. Because it's just great to be able to say, that's the only one I've watched. I decline to watch any further.
I'm a fan of anime, and I've only seen Love is War.
It's perfect.
That's it.
Well, speaking of war, they do play Mortal Kombat, and they don't really know the controls, but we see that Riley has prepared this giant bucket of quarters, and she alludes to the fact that she spent all the time breaking into all these machines to get all this ready. And so they play Mortal Kombat. It's great. They learn about the fatalities. But what we really see here is a creative way to show the passage of time, because they had a bucket full of quarters, and then as the camera cuts back, we see that that bucket is upturned, and most of those quarters have been used on the machine, alluding to a lot of time having passed, which reminds us of the clicking time bomb that exists probably across the mall here a little bit. So as they wrap up their Mortal Kombat play session, Ellie kind of is like, hey, I kind of maybe need to go home. And that's kind of a weird thing for her to say, but it seems like they get close and kind of have this intimate moment. Maybe, the weird tension where their faces get kind of close, but then they don't kiss and nothing happens. Yeah. And so Ellie then is like, well, I really need to get back, which is probably the most human part of this episode, is that kind of give and take when you have that romantic tension where it's like, I'm going to put myself out here and take some risks so that you know how I feel. Well, maybe this isn't reciprocated in the way that I want, so I'm going to pull back a little bit to make sure that I don't get hurt, or to make sure that this isn't misinterpreted as something else.
Right.
And how do I navigate this? And Riley kind of extends the olive branch and is like, no, don't go home. There's more to do here. Why take the time to show that, and where do they go next?
I mean, gosh, it feels like almost a canon real experience. Anytime you're in this awkward moment, your immediate instinct is to withdraw, to draw back, and to protect and preserve yourself. And so, I mean, it's like, oh, I'm so tired. I guess I'm going to go to bed. It's things like that.
Yeah.
So that felt real to me. It felt really real to me. And I love that Riley is like, no, not yet, because she knows that this is really their last night together, and she doesn't want it to end. Now, Ellie does not realize that at this point. And this leads to some big conversations about what does this mean with Ellie and Riley. Yeah.
And Riley is ahead in the change process. So if we go back to our 7-step model here, so Riley has been doing these things.
She's been experimenting, and now she's made a decision.
So they're in different spots, right? And part of the nature of this adventure together is Riley seems to want to get some closure and try and get Ellie to catch up on that model. And it's why I think models like this are so helpful, is because it provides this third-party space to discuss with people that you're close to, or even with yourself, to kind of understand, okay, this is kind of where I'm at on this scale dealing with this. Where are you? What is this looking like for you? And it provides something that you can kind of both look at and walk around. So any tools that are developed like that to assist with that process, I think have a ton of value for us, and they're worth paying attention to. And we get to see that modeled as Riley is ahead of Ellie in their discussions. Riley introduces some of why she felt like she had to leave here. Can you tell us about that decision and then where that plays into this dynamic too?
Sure. Well, Riley, tells her this is my last night in Boston because the Fireflies have assigned her to a new post. And, they back with Fedra, she had been given these menial tasks, the ones that were threatened upon Ellie.
Right.
And Riley's like, that's not the life for me. And so she's choosing actively something else. And so she's getting out of the framework, the umbrella that she was stuck under. And I think that that's a really powerful moment. And Ellie responds with that level of denial and frustration, anger, bargaining even of like, let's try this instead, doing everything that she can to really sort of figure this out. Because, I mean, she's never really had anybody that cared for her the way that Riley does, or at least been as thoughtful as Riley is. And so she's got to protect that, preserve that, because what she left with, what is life like after that?
Well, the real shock of the episode, we thought it was their departure and their friendship taking on a new phase as Riley has to leave the city. But the actual shock of the episode happens shortly after. Yeah. Talk us through kind of Chekhov's infected over here that was alluded to that has now decided to show up, and kind of what happens there.
What's incredible about this particular episode is that they have this catalyst for separation between the two of them, and they come to a relative place of peace. We're going to make the most of it. And we're going to, it's kind of like when your best friend growing up moves away, which feels like a canon experience, at least in every teen movie I've ever seen. And you always say, well, we're going to keep in touch, and we're going to write each other every day, and that you figure out a way to make it work. And so they negotiate a place of peace here. And it's almost like when you have autonomy and agency in your life, a shock can be overcome. But as soon as they gain a place of peace with that, the next shock comes. And this infected comes in, attacks them, and both of them have been bitten. And they drop straight back down to the bottom of this model. Yeah. And so it's a reset. It's like we're going into shock now. We're going into denial. We're going into frustration and anger. And you see it so perfectly with Ellie taking the baseball bat and bashing all the trinkets into place, right? Yeah. Destroying everything, all the glass. And Riley's just like, there's some more glass over there if you want. I mean, it's like...
It's great.
It's a great line. So you get to see them respond in real time here. I think it's a good... rehashing of this model.
Well, let's talk about their processing a little bit, because Riley is the one who seems to come to the processing stage a little faster than Ellie. We could talk about why that is, maybe. I don't know if it matters why that is too much, but she's ahead of Ellie again in this processing. So she kind of outlines these three paths. The specifics of them, it essentially we off ourselves now to keep from turning, or we just see what happens, or this kind of third path that she's talking about. And those are important, but there's a couple lines of dialogue that I think are really important. Like Ellie says before this, like, you mattered to me first before you mattered to the Fireflies. And that's why I don't want to lose you. I think that's a great piece of writing that really leaves a lot of space to understand what Ellie's feeling, but really just gets to the core of it. I cared about you first. How could you leave me? And now that's a more permanent situation when they're thinking about their mortality and their demise. But then Riley talks about, hey, listen, we're going to have this time together, and if we kill ourselves, I don't want to give up the time that we could have. I don't want to give up the space that we had before we were going to leave. We were already going to depart, and this just changes it to maybe something more permanent, and I don't want to take ourselves out of this now, because these hours that we have to live together are things that I don't want to give up. This is an intense processing for 14, 15-year-olds, however old they are in this scene. Why do the stakes being so high with them both being bitten impact the kind of gravity of this conversation? And I'm going to hold the second part of my question. What do the stakes have to do with the nature of this conversation? Because they're having the same conversation they were having before, but now it's on an accelerated, more permanent time frame. How does that impact the nature of what they talk about and the decisions that they explore?
It's a loaded question in a few ways. The first thing it makes me think of is that Riley is handling this very differently than Ellie is. And perhaps that's because she has been outside of that safety net of Fedra. And so her decisions have consequences. Her decisions are going to have some collateral. And so she's already, having grown up a little bit, she's learning what it's like to make decisions and always have a plan B and a plan C, something that we learn with age. Ellie, however, is not quite in that. So you can imagine that Ellie's like, if I hadn't left Fedra tonight, like we wouldn't have gotten bitten, this wouldn't have happened, all this kind of stuff. And so she's just bashing everything out of frustration. Whereas Riley, who isn't that much older than Ellie, has come to a place of acceptance of like, these are our choices. And now what do we do? Now what? I think that the big thing is that catalytic moments like this force us to grow up more quickly than we would want, or that more quickly than a safety net would allow us. I see it with freshmen at the university all the time. It's the first time that they have mastery over their time, or at least agency over their time.
Right.
They can choose to do some things, choose not to, and they inevitably halfway through their first semester are like, I'm not really sure I like this. Like there's a lot of responsibility, even though I have more free time. Like it's all on me.
Yeah, this is a bit of a Elizabeth Kubler-Ross inception, if I could maybe coin that phrase. I don't know if any, but it is. It's layers within layers of this kind of decision-making process that they experience when it comes to change. They were in one, and then they're in another one, and then, maybe they'll be in a dream within a dream, within a dream, whatever it ends up being. And so we need to get to what their decision is. They're processing. Honestly, and this is where the writing I think is really good, their processing has already happened throughout the rest of the episode.
Right.
So we're kind of arriving at the inevitable departure, although not permanent, that was always coming. They've kind of discussed how they felt and why they felt that way. Mm-hmm. So there's not a ton that has to be said in this moment. They can kind of get straight to the point with what's kind of more permanent. So the process that they just did to get to this point all episode, they do it all over again in kind of a speed run, but we've gotten to see them do it once, and so we get to see a few more nuanced parts of it there. You talk about the difference between deciding your fate and having your fate imposed upon you, or the inevitability of your fate. Riley tends to illustrate this pretty well, I think. Tell us about why that stuck out to you, that there's a difference between choosing your fate, even if the outcome is the same, and having it imposed upon you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the question that we sometimes talk about regarding other media about destiny, and like, is it predetermined, or are we just on tracks, or is it setting a trajectory that then you can shift based on your decision making? And that's kind of what Riley does. Like, yeah, what's going to happen is going to happen, but I am choosing not to let that be the last word on this. And so we're going to take advantage of every second we've got left. We're going to turn together. We're going to do this on our terms, even though it's out of our hands. And I think there's something beautiful to that. That kind of perspective helps us to live well so that we can die well. I think that is such an important thing for everybody to reckon with.
Say that again. Live well so we can die well.
Yeah, it helps us to live well so that we can die well. When you say, okay, I'm going to go out, even if it's out of my hands, it will be on my terms.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Sorry, that's... we do... There's times that we think about that more acutely in life, and then there's times that happens and spread up more over time. And I'm really thinking differently about this episode based on our conversation, even from when we watched it, just having talked about it. And I think that the way that this episode deals with fate and destiny and how our choices play into that, what our plans are, and then how what happens subverts that is really well done.
Evan, I spent a few years as a hospice chaplain in a hospital, and I can tell you just from experiencing room after room and situation after situation, those that, even though their fate was felt to be out of their hands, those that were able to reckon with, like, I'm going out the way that I want to go out, they had so much peace, and their families had so much more peace. Not that there wasn't grief and sadness, but they regained control. And that's why I'm so big into this. Like, destiny, like what's been done and all of that kind of stuff, that may be set in stone. But the way that you respond and react and live into it, well, that's not written in stone. And that's how you reclaim fate from what's been said and done.
It's really well said. It kind of marks that agency line that we talked about between steps 4 and 5. You know, when we have the shock, denial, frustration, and depression are things that are typically kind of imposed. The seizing of that fate, the regaining our agency and the elements of control that we can start with that experimentation, that decision, and that integration there.
Yeah. And let me say this, because it can almost come off as somewhat callous. You've got to go through those early steps and stages, at least in some form. You need to deny it so that you can accept reality. You need to have frustration so that you can really come to a place beyond that frustration. All of those begin to help you experiment better, decide better, and reintegrate better, whatever life after that catalytic moment is.
I'll do my best.
You specifically, Evan. The weight of the world on your shoulders.
Yeah, I'll do my best. Well, before we get back to Ellie and Joel for just that last part of this episode and start to wrap it up, what else would you want to mention that's notable from this interaction with Riley and Ellie and how that flashback chooses to close itself before we come back to our present reality?
The biggest thing for me is, and they don't really show all of the ins and outs of this, but the agonizing minutes and hours as Riley changes and Ellie doesn't, and what that must have been for Ellie, and to say, why am I not changing, and to realize, oh my gosh, like what's wrong with me? I mean, to think that what is wrong with me that I didn't, and am I going to? I mean, the fear that she must have had. And you can also see that that's probably where Marlene and others were as well. What is wrong with her? What's different? So
it's a physical mirroring of what she felt emotionally, because Riley was changing and leaving and moving on, and Ellie was going to stay the same. Right. So it's the exact same thing that's happened that they've been processing. It's just illness versus her health and her immunity. It
is such a great mirroring and paralleling of those themes, and I love it. I do love that.
Everybody's really frustrated with it because they just wanted to know what happened to Joel. But
that's it. But this is important. I probably would have, I don't know. I don't know what I would have done. I think they did it the right way. It's better binged than week to week.
I think that also goes to why I think things like this, and I've enjoyed personally taking the time to explore it in this way. When things are done thoughtfully, intentionally, and art is made in that way, and it has something to say, we're asking, does it accomplish, what is it trying to say, and does it accomplish its goals? What did they set out to do, and did they accomplish it? And this show is worth taking the time to go back and analyze. There are a lot of lessons to be learned, and there's a lot of great storytelling elements that are in here that get nested into a action-packed, high-octane, fungal zombie adventure. And it's why science fiction is so fun, is because they can do more with the setting to put characters in more discernible positions. And I think that you've done a great job helping us illustrate how they did that and how it relates to our own lives. So as we transition into this final scene, what has actually happened here is pretty much the fulfillment of these last 5 steps. So if we go over the model again, it starts with shock, it moves into denial, it goes to frustration, and it goes to depression. So that depression and the door opening is where we leave Ellie in this process. Yeah. She's shocked. She's denying that this can happen. She's frustrated that she's been put in this situation that she has to take care of Joel. And she just kind of wallows in it a little bit in this cabin. But then when she opens that door into her past and then to go explore, we come back in and we see her experimenting, making decisions, and then integrating the solution. She goes out and she scavenges for supplies. She finds some first aid kit to be able to stitch him up and figure it out, right? And so we come...
And don't miss, like, her experimentation was entrusting herself to Joel. And she was doing that by virtue of Marlene, who she trusted by virtue of Riley. And so she's been experimenting, and now at the risk of losing Joel, she makes a decision. I'm going to save him, because this matters to me. So, I mean, you really are seeing this, and we'll get to that moment of integration in what their relationship is like, certainly in the next 2 episodes. But it also, what we haven't talked about, and what we probably need to in the next episode or 2, is Joel's process of all of this and what his experimentation currently is with Ellie, and how that is going to lead to some decision making later on.
Yeah, Pedro Pascal has a couple really notable lines in this one. He says, leave me.
Yeah.
Just let me die. And then he also does some really good,
yeah, those were his best 2 lines, actually. So
yeah, those are really well delivered there. Which, you know, he's just getting him ready to play Mandalorian, where you never see his face, you know, which is great. So this episode kind of comes to a close, and we see that Ellie is stitching Joel up physically, but she's also been stitching him up emotionally along the way. So we're maybe getting a more repaired emotional Joel, and we will maybe arrive with a more repaired physical Joel in the next episode. But we aren't quite sure, and there's only 2 episodes left in the season. So we are looking forward to kind of what comes next. Any final thoughts before we get into our reminders here, Wade?
No, all I can say is I love the next episode. I love it. I love it from a religious studies standpoint. I love it from a character development standpoint. I love the next episode. So
next episode is so slimy.
It's slimy, and I love it. So that's it.
Well, get ready for a nice slimy episode recap and analysis next week. Right. As always, make sure to tune in on Tuesdays and Thursdays for the streams. Tuesday specifically, where we're covering the section of the game that's covered in the show. And look out and get ready for The Last of Us Season 2 premiering on April 13th. So you can always check out all of that information. What did I miss in the tag?
Follow us on social media, Prof Noctis, all over the place. Thanks for the time. Oh, one final thing. I got to say this. If you liked the discussion today, go and buy this book. It is in the comments description. Make sure you use the affiliate link. We do get a cutback from that for the channel. So
and go watch the interview.
Yeah, and Psychology of The Last of Us with Anthony Bean. Fantastic guest, fantastic book.
And we'll make sure to link the interview. Yeah.
Yeah. And with that, everybody, when you are lost in the darkness, look for the light. We'll see you next time.
Bye. Look for the light. Bye. Hey, thanks to Husky by the Geek for our theme music. Thanks to Nick Smith for our graphics. Thanks to Elizabeth Kubler Ross for her awesome work and research. And most of all, thanks to you. This program is brought to you by viewers like you, and we just really appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time to be here with us as we recap this episode. We hope that everything is going great in your world. Hope you have a wonderful day, and we so look forward to seeing you on our next episode. Bye-bye, everybody.